Hey crew, it's Ben, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are going to be getting back into the book of Samuel, or First Samuel. But before we begin, if you are new here, if you're unfamiliar with what I'm doing, I hold an unconventional Bible study because I hold unconventional beliefs. And if you are unfamiliar with what we are doing here, I suggest that you start in Genesis because you might get your toes stepped on, and I would really hate for that to happen. For those of you who have been following along and know where we're doing, we're back into First Samuel. We are going to be in verse 12 or chapter 12 because we left off in chapter 11. And what we saw was the people of Israel demanding a king like it had been foretold that they would do in Exodus. But for some reason it pissed God off and he got kind of petty about it. And today we're going to hear Samuel's farewell address, and then we're going to see how the chosen one of God immediately loses his kingdom. So let's get into it. And then Samuel said to all Israel, I have listened to your voice in all that you have said to me, and I have set over you a king. Now, here is a king walking before you, and I am old and gray, and my sons are here with you. I have walked before you from my youth until this day. Here I am. Bear witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox or donkey have I taken? Whom have I cheated or oppressed? From whose hand have I accepted a bribe or closed my eyes? Tell me, and I will restore it to you. You have not wronged us or oppressed us, they replied, nor have you taken anything from the hand of man. And Samuel said to them, The Lord is a witness against you, and his anointed is a witness today, that you have not found anything in my hand. He is a witness, they replied. And then Samuel said to the people, The Lord is the one who appointed Moses and Aaron, and who brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Now, present yourselves so that I may confront you before the Lord with all the righteous acts he has done before you and your fathers. And when Jacob went to Egypt, your fathers cried out to the Lord, and he sent them Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt and settled them in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God, and he sold them into the hand of Sisera, the commander of the army of Hazor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and the king of Moab, who fought against them. And then they cried out to the Lord and said, We have sinned, for we have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and Ashtoreths. Now deliver us from the hands of our enemies, so that we may serve you. So the Lord sent Jerubbaal, Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel, and he delivered you from the hands of your enemies on every side, and you dwelt securely. But when you saw that Nahash, king of the Amorites, was moving against you, you said to me, No, we must have a king to rule over us, even though the Lord your God was your king. Now that's more to the story than we had before, right? Before we didn't, they just wanted a king. Now we see that there was an army moving against him, and that's why they wanted a king. We will see in Samuel this repeated pattern of time jumps and reasoning explained in the wrong places, right? It is not put together in a cohesively intelligent manner. Part of that is intentional, so that it is intentionally confusing, so that you don't question it too hard. Now here is the king you have chosen, the one you requested. Behold, the Lord has placed a king over you. And you would think that if God had chosen this man, that this would be the man. This is the guy to get it done. That's what you would expect, right? Now, Israel is used to broken promises. They are used to not getting what they expected, because when they left Egypt, they expected a easy entry into the promised land. They expected that their God was going to lead them and fight the battles for them, because that was the promise they were given. But that didn't happen, and then they were repelled the first time that they tried to take possession of the land, and they went to Sinai. And at Sinai, they formed this technology, right? In my opinion, my conspiracy-minded opinion. They went to Sinai, made a deal with an entity, and got this technology, and they went forth from there with this covenant. And they had signed in blood something before they even went up the mountain. And what was placed inside the thing was the blood signed documents. And so they make this covenant that they're going to go now and get this land. This is another covenant, right? It's like the fifth or sixth covenant in the history of Israel, right? And he keeps having to make new covenants because he can't keep the old ones. And so they're fully expecting that this ark and these priests are going to lead them into the land unopposed. They are just going to walk in. And that is not what happened. Again, there is a repeated pattern of broken promises, but you would think, and here's my reasoning for most of this, is if you are the God Almighty, the creative power of the entire universe, He who made all things, in whom I believe and serve wholeheartedly, if that is the God who is setting out the law, and He has direct, face-to-face interaction with a representative on the planet, it is God and a dude talking face to face, and He sets out the law. The law should be perfect. It should be flawless. This is how God expects you to act in order to receive blessings. And if you don't, here are the curses, right? But that's not what we get. We get a imperfect law, a law that has to be redeemed later, right? In the opinion of the Christians, those who are looking forward to Christ for the redemptive ark, it has to be redeemed later because the law is not correct. But how did God enact a law that is not correct? Now, we have seen, through my opinion, how I believe that God did enact the perfect law. The perfect law that He said was go forth, be fruitful and multiply, which does not necessarily just mean have sex and kids. Take dominion over the whole world and subdue it. Be stewards of the planet. Serve and love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. And that is the sum of the entirety of the law. And we don't do that. We have all this minutia that we added, and we put it on God's name, but it is not in God's name. Samuel. And now here is the king you have chosen, the one you requested. Behold, the Lord has placed a king above you. And if you fear the Lord and serve Him and obey His voice, and if you do not rebel against the command of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, then all will be well. But if you disobey the Lord and rebel against His command, then the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. Now, therefore, I stand and see this great thing that the Lord will do before your eyes. Is it not the wheat harvest today? I will call on the Lord to send thunder and rain, so that you will know and see what great evil you have committed in the sight of the Lord by asking for a king. And so Samuel called to the Lord, and on that day the Lord sent thunder and rain. And as a result, all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel, and they pleaded with Samuel, pray to the Lord your God for your servants, so that we will not die. For we have added to all our sins the evil of asking for a king. Now, we talked about yesterday about what a great evil it was for Israel to ask for a king to justly rule them, for them to have an assurance that the government would be consistent, because they have not seen that the entire time they have lived in the theocratic republic of Israel. They are not a unified people by any means. They have no main governance. They have the Levites who are dispersed, and they have Gilgal, the mound of foreskins, where they go and do their sacrifices, and that is their whole everything. And so they ask for a king so that they have consistency in their life. And it is told and laid out in the law, this perfect law. It is laid out in this law, not only that they will ask for a king, but how to handle that. But Samuel gets mad. Samuel gets jealous. Samuel gets prideful. And Samuel asks for thunder and rain on the wheat harvest for these people. It wasn't God who said, I'm going to do this. It was Samuel who said, I'm mad. Show these people what you can do. That's a problem. Because what he did here is ruin the wheat harvest for his people. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you have done. You have just ruined the way that your people are going to eat over the course of the next year. And so your pettiness is the problem here. It is not their disobedience. They are right to ask for a righteous judge. Your sons are not being righteous, just as the man who died that you took the place of sons was not doing the right thing either. And so maybe they're okay for asking for someone to be a righteous king. And maybe it's Samuel's fault for choosing the wrong one because he was just this big old dude. And as a result of people all feared the Lord and Samuel. Do not be afraid, Samuel replied. Even though you have committed all this evil, do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all of your heart. Do not turn aside after worthless things that cannot profit you or deliver you, for they are empty. Indeed, for the sake of his great name, the Lord will not abandon his people, because he was pleased to make you his own. Where? We have not seen that. And as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. And I will continue to teach you the good and right way. Above all, fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. But if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will be swept away. And Saul was 30 years old when he became king and reigned over Israel for 42 years. He chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul at Michmash in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. And the rest of the troops he sent away, each to his own home. And then Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Geba, and the Philistines heard about it. So Saul blew the ram's horn throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." Now, we will see Jonathan is the son of Saul. And we will see more about this particular story a little bit farther down. This is one of those breaking things up so it's not consistent and you can't really question it. Right? But Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Geba because, again, what happens whenever Israel gets an army? And so, because of that, Saul blew the ram's horn throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked an outpost of the Philistines, and now Israel has become a stench to the Philistines. And then the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. Now the Philistines assembled to fight against Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and troops as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And they went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. And seeing that they were in danger, because their troops were hard pressed, the men of Israel hid in caves and thickets among the rocks, and in cellars and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan into the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul, however, remained at Gilgal, and all his troops were quaking in fear. That's interesting, ain't it? It's really, really quite interesting. This is also a time jump, I think, to yesterday and how it came about, right? That whole situation. And again, we don't have the army of God serving the king or even the prophet going out and valiantly fighting. We see them again when faced with troops, right? They picked the fight and then went hid in the caves. That's what happened right here. Jonathan, Saul's son, went and picked a fight. And then Saul's like, all right, fine, we'll fight. And he sounds the horns and people show up. And then turns out it's all the Philistines. Well, they got some big old boys down there too. And so they quake. They don't have faith in the Lord. There's no faith in these people. And seeing that they're in danger and hard pressed, they hide in caves and in thickets, among the rocks and in cellars and cisterns. So they are taking shelter everywhere but the battlefield. They are taking shelter everywhere but on the battlefield of the Lord. Because if they're doing the right thing, then God is with them. If they're not, then they know He's not. But why answer the call if you think it's the wrong thing? Like, there's no faith in these people. They're not coming to the defense of their land, right? They weren't, or they are now, but they're actually responding because of Jonathan. And seeing that they were in danger because they were hard pressed, they hid. And Saul waited 7 days for the time appointed by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal. And the troops began to desert Saul. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings." And he offered up the burnt offering. Now this is what brings me back to yesterday, where we were talking about Samuel sent Saul to wait for him 7 days. And then we didn't get the back end of that story then, right? This is the back end of that story from yesterday. And just as he finished the burnt offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. Now we did get that Saul made a offering, right? But here it's at Gilgal, which is the right place. But yesterday it was not. It was in a different place. And then Samuel shows up just as he finishes the burnt offering. And "What have you done?" Samuel asked. And Saul replied, "When I saw that the troops were deserting me and that you did not come at the appointed time, and the Philistines were gathering at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will descend upon me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." "You have acted foolishly," Samuel declared. "You have not kept the command that the Lord your God gave you. If you had, the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time." How? How? I'm going to get upset for Saul here, right? Because what did he do? He answered the call when he didn't want to. He hid from getting this call. And then he's like, "All right, fine. I'm the one that's picked out." Through this whole facade, right? This whole fakery Samuel goes through. And then he's like, "All right, fine. I will go and wait for you for 7 days, like you told me to." And he does. He goes and waits for 7 days. And then after the people are like, "All right, fine, Samuel's not going to show up, so let's go ahead and leave." And people are leaving. And so Saul's like, "All right, obviously this is because I have not shown favor to God. There are no more Levites, and Samuel has not shown up for the appointed day." So he does what a faithful man would do. He gives the offering. He's been appointed king. He's supposed to be that, right? But no, fine, whatever. You've acted foolishly. So this God who has promised you kingship, he's just going to take it away for acting logical, for trying your best to be faithful. Just take it away. Like it's not like he could have went to the Levites. They're gone. It's not like he could go to Samuel. He didn't show up. He could be dead. What is he supposed to do? Wait a month and then decide? While the Philistines just run them over, they're gathering right there, and his people are running and hiding. He's got to do something. So he turns to God, and that's the wrong thing. Okay, all right, fine, that's your God. That's not mine. And then Samuel set out from Gilgal and went up to Gibeah in Benjamin. And Saul numbered the troops there who were with him, about 600 men. And now Saul and Jonathan his son and the troops with him were staying in Geba of Benjamin, while the Philistines camped at Michmash. And the raiders went out of the Philistine camp in 3 divisions. One headed to Ophrah in the land of Shual, another towards Beth Horon, and a third down the border road overlooking the valley of Zeboim, facing the wilderness. And no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, because the Philistines had said the Hebrews must not be allowed to make swords or spears. Instead, all the Israelites would go down to the Philistines to sharpen their plowshares, mattocks, axes, and sickles. The charge was a pound for sharpening a plowshare or a mattock, a third of a shekel for sharpening a pitchfork or an axe, and a third of a shekel for repointing an ox goad. And so on the day of battle, not a sword or spear could be found in the hands of the troops with Saul and Jonathan. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had weapons, and a garrison of the Philistines had gone out to the pass at Michmash. Now that is an interesting bit of history right there that we have not received at all. We have seen where the Philistines are oppressing, but supposedly Israel is in possession of their own lands, and yet they cannot forge their own weapons. No blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel. Now, when they left, they had at least some goldsmiths, they had at least some silversmiths, and you cannot tell me that they lost the trade over time. And they have lands rich in iron, right? And so, why did they not have weapons? How could somebody stop them unless they were not even a nation at that point? Well, that's some interesting history to look into. Like, it doesn't matter to me, right? But it is consistently a problem. Like, how do you go from being this fighting force of 600,000 men, accrued for war? You had 600,000 weapons. Like, not necessarily all swords or whatever, but like 600,000 weapons because you left Egypt with them. You fought through the wilderness with them. You had battles, and then you looted an entire nation. And then you went into another nation and destroyed them. And we've seen you destroy several nations since then. Where did all the weapons go? Is there a throne of swords out there somewheres? Now, it is entirely possible for a subjected people to have to surrender all of their weapons. But if that is the case, if that is what happened, then Israel was not Israel. You're not a nation if you're completely subjected, right? Now, if you come out from that and you reform a nation, that's one thing. But if you're just completely under the subjection of another nation, you're not a nation. You're a puppet state. And one day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man bearing his armor, "Come, let us cross over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But Jonathan did not tell his father. And meanwhile, Saul was staying under the pomegranate tree in Migron, on the outskirts of Gibeah. And the troops who were with him numbered about 600 men, including Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. He was the son of Ichabod's brother, Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli the priest of the Lord in Shiloh. Oh, wait, that's a problem. He was the son of Ichabod's brother, Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli. Well, Eli, his son Phinehas, and his entire line don't get to grow up anymore. That's what God said yesterday. And there were cliffs on both sides of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross the Philistine outpost, and one was named Bozez and the other Seneh. One cliff stood to the north towards Michmash and the other to the south towards Geba. I apologize. Normally I pull up the geography. I didn't today. I'm not going to take the time to do it now. We're just going to roll through it. This is around the Jordan Valley, Jericho, Gilgal area. We've been through it several times. And Jonathan said to the young man bearing his armor, "Come, let us cross over to the outpost of these uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will work on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." And his armor-bearer replied, "Do all that is in your heart. Go ahead. I am with you, heart and soul." "And very well," said Jonathan, "we will cross over towards these men and show ourselves to them. And if they say, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stay where we are, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come on up,' then we will go up, because this will be our sign that the Lord has delivered them into our hands." And so the two of them showed themselves to the outpost of the Philistines, who exclaimed, "Look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes in which they are hiding." And so the men of the outpost called out to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, "Come on up and we'll teach you a lesson." "Follow me," Jonathan told his armor-bearer, "for the Lord has delivered them into the hands of Israel." And so Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet, with his armor-bearer behind him. And the Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer followed and finished them off. In that first assault, Jonathan and his armor bearer struck down about 20 men over half an acre of land. And then terror struck the Philistines in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. Even those in the outpost and raiding parties trembled. Indeed, the earth quaked, and panic spread from God. Now, when Saul's watchmen at Gibeah in Benjamin looked and saw the troops melting away and scattering in every direction, Saul said to the troops who were with him, "Call the roll and see who has left us." And when they had called the roll, they saw that Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. And Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God," for that time it was with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priest, the commotion in the Philistine camp continued to increase. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." And then Saul and all his troops assembled and marched to the battle, and they found the Philistines in total confusion, each man wielding the sword against his neighbor. And the Hebrews, who had previously gone up into the surrounding camps of the Philistines, now went over to the Israelites, who were with Saul and Jonathan. And when all the Israelites who had been hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they also joined Saul and Jonathan in the battle. And so the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle moved on beyond Beth-aven. Well, that's an interesting turn of events. We did now have a single actor. We have a hero. His name is Jonathan. It is not Saul. And this hero has turned the tide of battle. He has come out from hiding and has personally taken down 20 men, and his armor bearer comes behind and finishes the job out, because that's what they did, right? The little squire comes along with the dirk and just handles the business that the master leaves behind. And so that's what causes the whole thing. These people go into confusion and start killing themselves. That's well within the power of God. We're not even going to play with that, right? But then the Hebrews, who had previously gone into the surrounding camps of the Philistines, now went over to the Israelites, who were with Saul and Jonathan. Well, aren't the Hebrews the Israelites? Like, it gets really funny how these distinctions continue to be made, despite the fact that these people have been named Israel way back here. There are still many names for them: Israelites, Hebrews, Judeans. Like, besides their whole tribe of Judea, it appears there is like a whole subset of Judea within Judaism, right? Because that's how it gets divided later between the Israelites and the Judeans. And it's not just the tribe. And so it's funny that the Hebrews, who had previously gone into the surrounding camps, now went over to the Israelites. And then there's confusion and people stabbing each other with swords. I'm not saying that this account's not the right one. I'm just speculating that possibly what happened was the Hebrews went over to the camps and they weren't exactly friendly. And so they snuck attacked it. It would not be out of character, right? At all, for them to go, swear allegiance, and then pick up a sword and kill everybody in their sleep. Would not be out of character. And now the men of Israel were in distress that day, for the Saul had placed the troops under an oath, saying, "Cursed is any man who eats any food before evening, before I have taken vengeance on my enemies." So none of the troops tasted any food. Your troops are hiding. They are not fighting. They are not near you. You are not engaged in combat. You are not taking vengeance. If it was not for the lone actor of your son acting independently, this would not have happened. Unless the ambush in the camp was actually a thing, and he was actually waiting on that. And then all the troops entered the forest, and there was honey on the ground. And also, it is remarkably stupid, despite your beliefs. I don't care who you are, where you are, what you are. It does not matter to me what you believe. If you were going into a combat situation and your thought prior to that combat situation is, let us fast, you're stupid. You can fast in celebration after you have won, but you do not go into a battle not eating. You can go into prayer not eating. That battle is fine if you're not picking up a sword. But if you have to swing 2 to 3 pounds of metal repeatedly at other people who are angry at you, you want to have your starch level as high as possible. You want these people to eat as well as you can possibly make them. Now, there's a chance that they won't eat because the nerves are a thing. But if they have any sense whatsoever, they will eat, they will shit, and then they will fight. And then all the troops entered the forest, and there was honey on the ground. And when they entered the forest and saw the flowing honey, not one of them put his hand to his mouth, because they feared the oath. Jonathan, however, had not heard that his father had charged the people with the oath. So he reached out the end of the staff in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb and put it in his mouth, and his eyes brightened. And then one of the soldiers told him, your father bound the troops with a solemn oath, saying, cursed is the man who eats food today, and that's why the people are faint. My father has brought trouble to the land, Jonathan replied. Look at how my eyes have brightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. We're also going to pause real quick, and I'm going to plug what I'm doing over on Pitcast, because we're dealing with Plato and the works of Plato, and we're working through Timaeus, and they talk about the light of the eyes in Timaeus, and it is an interesting discussion that you might want to check out. Just look at how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little bit of this honey. How much better would it have been if the troops had eaten freely today from the plunder they took from their enemies? Would not the slaughter of the Philistines have been much greater? And that day, after the Israelites had struck down the Philistines, from Michmash to Ajalon, the people were very faint. So they rushed greedily to the plunder, taking sheep, cattle, and calves, and they slaughtered them on the ground and ate meat with the blood still in it. And then someone reported to Saul, look, the troops are sinning against the Lord by eating meat with the blood still in it. You have broken faith, said Saul. Roll a large stone over here at once. And then he said, go among the troops and tell them, each man must bring me his ox or sheep, and slaughter them in this place, and then eat. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it. And so that night everyone brought his ox and slaughtered it there. And then Saul built an altar to the Lord, and it was the first time he had built an altar to the Lord. And Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until dawn, leaving no man alive. Do what seems good to you, the troops replied. But the priest said, we must consult God here. Again, this is a problem simply because they have been told in Exodus and confirmed in Leviticus, they're not allowed to make sacrifice anywheres but the tabernacle. Now they have the ark, but they don't have the tabernacle, remember? And so that is a problem. Making sacrifice in an unauthorized location is a problem for the law. This is the king. In order to be the king, he has to recite the law that's in the law. And he has to write it down, but they didn't bother with all that. So Saul inquired of God, should I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel? But God did not answer him that day. And therefore Saul said, come here, all you leaders of the troops, and let us investigate how this sin has occurred today. As surely as the Lord who saves Israel lives, even if it is my son Jonathan, he must die. But not one of the troops said a word. And I mean, that is an interesting turn of phrase, right? Like, that's not how I'm going about things. I'm not putting it on my son before I know it's on my son. Now, transgression is one thing, but what happens is another thing. And making an affirmative curse in the name of the Lord is a problem. Like, this is taking the Lord's name in vain. If you do not follow through with it, you are taking the Lord's name in vain. But not one of the troops said a word. And then, because this is the guy who turned the tide, right? He's the one that's going to get in trouble. And then Saul said to all Israel, "You stand on one side, and I and my son Jonathan will stand on the other side. Do what seems good to you," the troops replied. And so Saul said to the Lord, the God of Israel, "Why have you not answered your servant this day? If the fault is with me or my son Jonathan, respond with the Urim. But if the fault is with the men of Israel, respond with the Thummim." And Jonathan and Saul were selected, but the people were cleared of the charge. Now we know that this is a farce. We know that this is being manipulated because of the whole farce of Saul being selected. So they already know what's going to happen. It's already known. That's why he had that particular turn of phrase. And then Saul said, "Cast a lot between me and my son Jonathan," and Jonathan was selected. "Tell me what you have done," just Saul commanded him. So Jonathan told him, "I only tasted a little honey with the end of the staff that was in my hand, and now I must die?" And Saul declared, "May God punish me and ever so severely if you, Jonathan, do not die." But the people said to Saul, "Must Jonathan die, he who accomplished such great deliverance for Israel? Never. As surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. For with God's help he accomplished this today." And so the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. And Saul gave up his pursuit of the Philistines, and the Philistines returned to their own land. And after Saul had assumed the kingship over Israel, he fought against his enemies on every side: the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he routed them. He fought valiantly and defeated the Amalekites, delivering Israel from the hand of its plunderers. Now, the sons of Saul were Jonathan, Ishvi, Malchishua, and his two daughters were Merab, his firstborn, and Michal, his younger daughter. His wife's name was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the commander of his army was Abner, the son of Saul's uncle Ner. Saul's father Kish and Abner's father Ner were sons of Abiel. The war with the Philistines was fierce in all the days of Saul, so he noticed any strong or brave man, Saul would enlist him. So, what happened here? Saul said, "In the name of the Lord, I will kill even my son if he has sinned against the Lord, because I made a promise that he didn't even know about." Okay? And he's going to be faithful to that. And he's like, "Yep, all right." And then the people are like, "No, we're going to overrule the Lord on this one." I don't disagree. I don't think that he should have been held responsible at all for eating the honey. I think it was a remarkably dumb decision. I think that maybe Samuel made the wrong decision. And if Samuel made the wrong decision, then he was led to it. And so he goes and he establishes the first standing army. That's what it's doing right here, right? The commander of his army, and the fact that he is constantly recruiting and fighting and all of that, that's the establishment of a standing army, which is one of the functions of the government, protecting the people from outside invasion. It's basically the only function of the government. All right, we're going to do 15, and I think that's the end of it for today. So, and then Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now, therefore, listen to the words of the Lord. This is what the Lord of the host says. I witnessed what the Amalekites did to the Israelites when they ambushed them on their way up from Egypt. Now, go and attack the Amalekites and devote to destruction all that belongs to them. Do not spare them, but put to death men and women, children and infants, oxen and sheep, camels and donkeys." And so Saul summoned the troops and numbered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers, and 10,000 men of Judah. That's a much more significant army than before. And Saul came to the city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. And he warned the Kenites, "Since you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt, go on and get out of the way of the Amalekites. Otherwise I will sweep you away with them." And so The Kenites moved away from the Amalekites, and then Saul struck down the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He captured Agag, king of Amalek, alive, but devoted all the others to destruction with the sword. And Saul and his troops spared Agag, along with the best of the sheep and cattle and fat calves and lambs, and the best of everything else. They were unwilling to destroy them, but they devoted to destruction all that was despised and worthless. Now, I did a word study on Agag, but this is not the same as or related to Gog and Magog and what's coming in that, as far as I can tell. If it is, that would put Magog south and west of Israel. And that doesn't really fit with what we see later. And Saul and his troops spared him. Okay. And then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned away from following me and has not carried out my instructions. Sorry. And Samuel was distressed and cried out to the Lord all that night. And early in the morning Samuel got up to confront Saul, but he was told, Saul is gone to Carmel, and behold, he has set up a monument for himself and has turned and gone down to Gilgal. And when Samuel reached him, Saul said to him, May the Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. But Samuel replied, Then what is that bleating of sheep and lowing of cattle that I hear? I'm sorry, y'all. That's not normal. But... And Saul answered, The troops brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we devoted to destruction. Stop, exclaimed Samuel. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, Saul replied. And Samuel said, Although you were once small in your own eyes, have you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel and sent you on a mission, saying, Go and devote to destruction the sinful Amalekites. Fight against them until you have wiped them out. So why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you rush upon the plunder and do evil in the sight of the Lord? But I did obey the Lord, Saul replied. I went on a mission that the Lord gave me. I brought back Agag, king of Amalek, and devoted the Amalekites to destruction. The troops took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of the things devoted to destruction, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. But Samuel declared, Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in the obedience to his voice? Behold, obedience is better than sacrifice, and attentiveness is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance is like the wickedness of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. And then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I have transgressed the Lord's commandment and your instructions, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now, therefore, please forgive my sin and return with me so I can worship the Lord. I will not return with you, Samuel replied, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and he has rejected you as king over Israel. And as Samuel turned to go, Saul grabbed the hem of his robe and he tore. And so Samuel said to him, The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to your neighbor, who is better than you. Moreover, the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind. For he is not a man, that he should change his mind. I have sinned, Saul replied. Please honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. And so Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. And then Samuel said, Bring me Agag, king of the Amalekites. And Agag came to him cheerfully, for he thought, Surely the bitterness of death is past. But Samuel declared, As your sword has made women childless, so your mother will be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord at Gilgal. And then Samuel went to Ramah, but Saul went up to his home in Gibeah of Saul. And to the day of his death Samuel never again visited Saul. Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. All right, next we get into the next king. What is Saul's big problem here, right? That he didn't kill them there and instead brought them back to kill them here. Because if we're taking it at his word, that's what he was planning on doing. He was coming to make a sacrifice before the Lord in thankfulness for this successful mission. It was right at the beginning of his kingship. And he was cursed right at the beginning of his kingship. And yet somehow, even though God himself cursed him, how many years? We're going to go all the way back up. And he reigned over Israel for 42 years. He was 30 when he became king and reigned for 42 years. So he was 72 when he died. He was a ripe old man at the end of his time. But he was cursed of God. We will get into some of the talkings about how he might be cursed as we go forward. And again, there's a lot of timing issues in this, right? It's meant to be that way. It jumps back and forth because some of the things described here happened when we were talking yesterday, and some of the things that happened yesterday we will talk about tomorrow. And so it's meant to be a little bit disruptive for you not to really pay too much attention to the inconsistency, right? The fact that God in these accounts is the inconsistent part. God didn't know that the Israelites, when he led the Hebrews from Egypt, he didn't know that they would be rebellious. When they got to the mountain, again, he didn't know that they would be rebellious. All the times he is completely surprised. This is God completely surprised. Really? God chose this king and then immediately regrets the decision. And then, after immediately regretting the decision, God lets him reign for 40 more years. Let's give him 2 years to get this done. And it might be that this happened at 40 years and he only lived 2 more years. That's not the way that it reads, right? And even with the timing jumps. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat complicated topic. I know that it's a little bit weird jumping back and forth and trying to pull from here and there and jam it all together. But I mean, that's what we have to do because of the way it is. And if we're going to read it from front to back, and that's really how I'm trying to do it. When we get to the Gospels, we'll probably do a chronological reading across the books, but here that's not really a practical thing. And so I'm not trying to pull references from Egypt and overload you with the verses. We've been through that. We talked about that. We're relaying the story as it is being relayed to us, and it is not a consistent God. It is not a just God that gave them the law that said if a man is cold and is gathering sticks on the Sabbath day, then you are to beat him in the head with rocks until he quits breathing. I refuse to believe that God gave you that commandment. I refuse. I refuse to believe a lot of them, the minutiae of the law. The entirety of the law can be summed up easily. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do that, you keep the sum of all the rest of the law. The only sacrifice that was ever required from God for you was you. Your sins are the only thing ever required. You say something like, Dear Heavenly Father, I come to you as a sinner and I ask for your forgiveness. I freely accept the grace you freely extend, and I ask you to change my life. And if you do that, that's a wrap. You don't need no blood. You don't need no dunking in the river. You don't need no pillars. You don't need anything but God to get with God. The only thing he ever required from you was a willing heart, for you to willingly serve him, to stand where he puts you, and to fight his battles because he gives us battles to fight. Most of the time, it is not with a sword. Almost all the time, it is not with the sword. God doesn't really need blood. He can do things on his own. He wants you to help people change their hearts. He wants you to help people change their lives, to help people become the best they can, to be the iron that sharpens iron, to put your light on a hill so that people can see it, to be the hands and feet of God and touch people and go to them. That's what we're supposed to do. But we don't. And so we're going to leave it to the crew. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.